It looks like we're live. Welcome to Love and Money Secrets TV. Oops, let me get my microphones all set. All righty. Welcome to Love and Money Secrets TV. I'm Dame Lillian Walker, your host, and today we are diving deep into Breaking the Habit of Becoming Yourself, Chapter 5, Part 2. We are on page 101. Survival, living as a somebody. So most of us embrace the traditional notion of ourselves as a somebody, but who we really are has nothing to do with the big three. Who we are is a consciousness connected to a quantum field of intelligence. When we become this somebody, this materialistic physical self living in survival, we forget who we truly are. We become disconnected and feel separate from the universal field of intelligence. The more we live impacted by stress hormones, the more chemical rush becomes our identity. If we fancy ourselves solely physical beings, we limit ourselves to perceiving only with our physical senses. And the more we use our senses to define our reality, the more we allow our senses to determine our reality. So we slip into that Newtonian model of thinking, which locks us into trying to predict the future based on some past experience. If you recall, the Newtonian model of reality is all about predicting an outcome. So now we are trying to control our reality instead of surrendering to something greater. Pause button here. I want you to listen carefully what was just said. Now we are trying to control our reality instead of surrendering to something greater. All we're doing is trying to survive. So if the quantum model of reality ultimately defines everything as energy, why do we experience ourselves more as physical beings than as beings of energy? We could say that the survival-oriented emotions are energy in motion, are lower frequency or lower energy emotions. They vibrate at a slower wavelength and therefore ground us into being physical. We become denser, heavier, more corporeal because that energy causes us to vibrate more slowly. The body quite literally becomes composed of more mass and less energy, more matter and less mind. So if you look in your books in figure 5A, the higher frequency waves at the top are vibrating faster, and therefore they're closer to the vibratory rate of energy and less to that of matter. So moving down the scale, you can see that the slower the wavelength, the material, like the more material the energy becomes. So thus the survival emotions ground us to be more like matter instead of potential waveforms of energy, which is what we talk about in quantum physics, that until you observe and put your focus and attention on something, everything is in potential waveforms of energy until you put your focus on it. The moment you put your awareness, your focused awareness on it, then those waveforms start to turn into particles. And now you have 1 particle, 2 particle, 3 particles, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They start to multiply and more particles until poof, they manifest into your 3D reality. So thus, the survival emotions ground us to be more like matter and less like energy, less like light. Emotions such as anger, hatred, suffering, shame, guilt, judgment, and lust make us feel more physical because they carry a frequency that is slower and more like that of physical objects. Did you catch that? I'm going to read it again. Emotions such as anger, hatred, suffering, shame, guilt, judgment, and lust make us feel more physical, more corporeal, it's more corporate because they carry a frequency that is slower and more like that of physical objects. So, however, the more elevated emotions, such as love, joy, gratitude, are a higher frequency. As a result, they are more energy like and less physical material. So it might make sense that if we inhibit our more primitive survival emotions and begin to break our addiction to them, our energy will be higher in frequency and less likely to root us to the body. So, in a way, we can liberate energy from the body when the body has actually become the mind into the quantum field. So, as our emotions become more elevated, we will naturally ascend to a higher level of consciousness, closer to source, and feel more connected to the universal intelligence. Addicted to being somebody. So when the stress response is actually turned on, whether in response to a real or even if it's a conjured, fabricated threat, a powerful cascade of chemicals rushes into our system and gives us a strong jolt of energy, momentarily waking us up in our bodies and certain parts of our brain to put all of our attention on the big three. This is very addictive to us because it's like drinking a triple espresso. We get turned on for a few moments. And in time, we unconsciously become addicted to our problems, our unfavorable circumstances, or our unhealthy relationships. So I'm going to hit the pause button here because when he's talking here about becoming addicted to your unhealthy relationships, if you are constantly in need of having to pick a fight with your significant other in order to feel alive, then that means that you are actually addicted to the hormones of stress and you are addicted to that feeling of feeling grounded, of being in that fight or flight mode in order to get your cocktail of endorphins in your body rather than being addicted to the emotion of love, of joy, and of peace, so that now you're able to center and focus that awareness to create really magnificent things. You're really squandering the energy because you want that high of feeling alive and feeling denser, thicker, heavier, more grounded in feelings of anger, frustration, hatred, shame, guilt. So think about that for a moment. What would you rather choose? Because it is a choice. You're choosing one or the other. Do you want to choose to be addicted to the feeling of love, joy, and peace, which is a much higher elevated level of emotion, and it is actually flowing not only more energy in your body, but there's literally more photonic energy, more photons, that's more light that travels through every cell in your body. And conversely, because you are more in a light state, you are more potential waveforms of energy instead of particle, which is why you feel lighter. You feel lighter in terms of the light, and in terms of heaviness, you feel lighter. You're not as heavy, you're not as dense. Or the flip side is you can choose to continue on with your addiction and your little cocktail of stress, anxiety, nervousness, worry, shame, guilt, which is going to keep you grounded. You're going to be heavier. Weight-wise, you're going to actually feel more drawn down. Of course, you're going to have less energetic resources, not only for cell restoration and rejuvenation and for growth, but obviously when you are in the fight or flight response, that's not a time for you to be creative, for you to create, for you to imagine, for you to have inspiration come through you, because after all, you're very dense matter. So what are you going to choose? The choice is yours. You can choose. And even if in the past you have been addicted to that fight or flight response, you can choose in this very moment. You can choose love as opposed to fear. And you can choose to embrace the truth of who you truly are, because you are not those negative thoughts, actions, and emotions, or the feelings that are lodged in your body. That's what we've been learning, not only in Becoming Supernatural, the first book that we read, but now in this book, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, you are learning to overcome, to be a master of oneself, to go into the silence and recognize the difference between your conscious awareness, your ego, and then the organ of your brain. And you are now the master of your brain and the master of your ego. And you command your ego to stay at bay. It's there for posterity. It's there for contrast. It's there to give you biofeedback. It's there for you to realize, oh, okay, that's my false self, my shadow side. That's not really the real me. I thought it was me, but it's not me. The real me is pure love. But my ego is trying to keep me small. It's trying to keep me safe. It's trying to keep me from progressing. That's part of the ego's job. By observing the ego, you can also identify what it is that you truly want, and it helps you define and refine the path that you're really supposed to be taking. So use the ego for which it was created, and then use the organ of your brain, which is basically the organ that has the capacity to interpret the vibrational frequencies of sight, smell, gustatory taste, hearing, tactile sense. But you, as your awareness, are now commanding your brain, and you're commanding your autonomic nervous system, and so on and so forth. Does that make sense? If you have any questions, make any comments below. I'll be sure to get back to any and all of you. But I think these are distinctions that need to be pointed out, because you have a choice of feeling lighter, happier, more joyous and loving, or you can dwell on the past. You can stick to the woe is me because of a past relationship, perhaps, that didn't work out. Maybe that past relationship was a month, maybe you broke up a month ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Whatever amount of time doesn't make any difference. So you could dwell in the history of the past, never really being in your present moment. And of course, if you're still dwelling in the past, then you're going to continue to recreate, and you're going to bring from the past, you're going to drag forward into your present and into your future, recreating those same past feelings, thoughts, and emotions. So you're going to still feel crummy moving forward because that's what you keep on focusing on. Or you can choose to draw a line in the sand and say, you know what? Today is the day that this changes in this moment at whatever time. Let's see, what time is it right now? It's 9:17 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. At 9:17 Pacific Standard Time, I am choosing to draw a line in the sand. That's how I was. My old personality created my own personal reality. And today, in this moment, I am choosing to make a choice. I'm going to change. I'm going to be the authentic, true, loving self. I'm going to embrace the love that I really am. I'm only going to choose to embrace loving thoughts about myself, the thoughts and the belief that I can do whatever it is that I want to create, whatever I want to future forecast, the future memories that I am creating in quantum. I can choose to recall those memories and then give appreciation and thanks and that elevated emotion of love, which is going to brain hack the organ of the brain, because the brain's going to think that it happened in the past, because the only reason why you ever are grateful and in appreciation is because of something that has already happened. So your brain, as you're using it as a map to the future, it's going to think, oh, this already happened. So it'll register that into the actual flesh and bones of your body and in your cell memory. And what it does is that as you are expanding your electromagnetic field, you become a magnet to that future event, so that it brings it collapses the time waves so that now it happens sooner rather than later. And that's how we are able to, in essence, be our own alchemist of our own lives, our own destiny, our own future. Any and all things can be created from this particular mechanistic formula. It's really exciting. Okay, moving forward, we keep these situations in our lives to feed our addiction to survival-oriented emotions so that we can remember who we think we are as a somebody. We just love the rush of energy we get from our troubles. Moreover, we also associate their emotional high with every person, thing, place, and experience in our outer world that is known and familiar. We become addicted to those elements in our environment as well. We embrace our environments as our identity. If you agree that we can turn on the stress response just by thinking, then it stands to reason that we can get the same rush of addictive stress chemicals as if we were being chased by a predator. As a consequence, we become addicted to our very thoughts. They begin to give us an unconscious adrenaline high, and we find it very hard to think differently, to think greater than how we feel, or to think outside of the proverbial box becomes just too uncomfortable. The moment we begin to deny ourselves the substance we are addicted to, in this case, the familiar thoughts and feelings associated with our emotional addiction, there are cravings, withdrawal pains, and a host of inner sub-vocalizations urging us not to change. And so we remain chained to our familiar reality, period. You see how it's us, nobody else but us, that is keeping us hostage, if you will, to the past. It's our need to feel the familiar, even though the familiar, being broke or being not in a loving relationship, or being maybe in a relationship that's fighting all the time, or going from job to job to job, as opposed to having a stable job, or being maybe in a deadbeat job where you hate it and the pay is okay, but you're truly not satisfied, you're not fulfilled, you're not living your purpose, but it is the job, in fact. So at least you know where to go every day. You know what you're going to get paid. You can count on seeing the same people, places, things. And so nothing ever changes because you haven't made any changes. Or you can choose to get out of your comfort zone and decide that it is an exciting place to be in the realm of the unexpected, because it is only in that realm of unexpected that if you create in quantum, you can create pleasant, abundant surprises that move you forward in the direction of where it is that you want to go. So the choice is yours. You can either stay a slave to your familiar past, keep on repeating. That's what some of the ancient texts talk about, generational sin. And this book is not about religion, but I would be remiss if I didn't allude to the different sacred texts that we have throughout the world, the different religions, the sacred books, the sacred texts. They basically all say the same thing. Whether you look at the Catholic Bible, the Christian Bible, you look at the Torah, the Old Testament in Judaism. If you look at the Hindus, ancient text, if you look at Buddhism, the Tao, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. They basically say the same thing. So they can't all be lying. There's truth in that text. And you've heard the proverb, as a man thinketh in his heart, as a man, not thinketh in his head, but as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So the ancient texts recognize the thinking brain that is inside the heart as it being the superior, dominant, more powerful creative force above that of the head or the brain. When you connect your heart, you choose to have heart coherence. You choose to connect it now to your brain. Now you are the master of your brain. Now you have heart and brain coherence. You're connecting the two, and now you can go quantum. If these two are disconnected, it's impossible for you to go quantum. And all you have to do is, when you choose to master your thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and recognize that, okay, I am this conscious awareness, and this conscious awareness is pure love. It only thinks loving thoughts towards myself. Anything short of a loving thought towards myself is my ego and my brain at work. And when you recognize that, then you can go, oh, wait a minute. No, you guys used to be the master. You used to rule the roost here, but I'm on to you now. And now I'm aware that I am the master. So I command the ego, and I command the brain, and I command my body. This is my tool. This is my magnet that I use while I'm on earth to create in all dimensions. And the greatest thing that we can learn while we're on planet Earth is, in fact, to love. And when we choose to master ourselves and to go into the void, to go into the silence, and use that unconditional love to quantum create, the sky's the limit. There's an infinite realm of possibilities. We are no longer held hostage by our intelligence. We're not held hostage by our past. We're not held hostage by whatever amount of education, whatever number of connections, whatever amount of resources you have. No, now you are plugged in, tuned in, tapped and turned on into the infinite realm. Anything that has, is, or ever will be is now at your disposal, at your fingertips. Now, all you have to do is focus. And then the only wild card that you have is you don't know when it's going to show up. You know that it will show up. You know that it will happen. You can't even afford 1% doubt. 1% doubt, you're out. So when you know that you know that you know, and when you do this enough times and you start to have manifestation after manifestation after manifestation, you start to get the hang of it. At first you're like, maybe that would have happened even if I hadn't. And you try to rationalize it, which there's a clue. Words are powerful. We have clues in our words that are trying to tell us the truth. It's right in our grill, right in our face, and we don't even recognize it. When you rationalize a situation, a circumstance, you are trying to ration out a portion of lies to justify why things are the way they are. Plain and simple. You are rationing out lies. That's rationalizing. Does it help you any? Maybe you feel smart. Maybe it gives you the perfect excuse not to accomplish whatever it is that is your goal. But is that really, truly, ultimately what you want? Really? It's really between you and you, nobody else. So why ration out a portion of lies to yourself? Forget rationalizing. Throw that out the door. Say, no, that was the past personality. That wasn't the true me. That's the counterfeit. I am going to stick with who I truly am, which is pure, unconditional love. And I'm going to take that elevated emotion of love, and I am going to push that energy out. I'm going to broadcast it out. I'm going to fan out my electromagnetic frequency. I'm going to fan out my toroidal field, and I am going to broadcast out this love, and I am going to put an elevated emotion that is going to connect now my heart and my brain together. Now I've got heart and brain coherence. Boom. Now I can go into 5D quantum. I can put in the order of what it is that I want. Feel the elevated emotion of love, of joy, and then the coup de grace and the bow on the gift is you shower appreciation and gratitude. You're like, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I appreciate it so much. Thank you, thank you. This is so exciting. Oh my gosh. And when you have that genuine feeling, and you can make believe these feelings, you know, you've experienced in your lifetime the feeling of love, the feeling of gratitude, the feeling of appreciation. So just recall a previous time where you felt really grateful, really appreciative, that you felt genuine love, and apply it to whatever it is that you're creating. And your brain, this is a biohack, a brain biohack. Your brain is going to think, oh, this is a memory of the past, even though you're mapping out your future. And so now you're recalling a memory that you're creating in the future as if it happened in the past. And that's how you bring it into this 3D reality. So thus, our thoughts and feelings, which are predominantly self-limiting, hook us back to all the problems, conditioned stressors, and bad choices that produce the fight or flight effect in the first place. We keep all these negative stimuli around us so that we can produce the stress response, because that addiction reinforces the idea of who we are, only serving to reaffirm our own personal identity. Simply put, most of us are addicted to the problems and conditions of our lives that produce stress. No matter whether we're in a bad job or a bad relationship, we hold our troubles close to us because they help reinforce who we are as a somebody. They feed our addictions to low frequency emotions. Period. I got to tell you, it's amazing when you look. The study of human behavior is absolutely riveting, fascinating. And one of the things that I have said for a long time, I want to say that maybe about 10 or 15 years into my career as a lender, one of the things that I started to notice, because I've always been mindful and aware when I would recognize patterns, it was something that helped me systemize myself very quickly when I first started in the lending business, and it made me really efficient. I was able to see certain patterns, and anything that was a pattern that I could consolidate and that I could repeat over and over again so that I used the least amount of energy, and my productivity then could increase because everything was then systematized. I noticed that people respond in predictable ways. You know, once you've interviewed a certain number of people, and whether it was a homeowner who was looking to buy a bigger house. So there's a pattern that people who are first-time buyers follow. People who are not first-time buyers, they bought a house before, and now this is either their second or third or fourth home, and they're upgrading to a bigger home. There's a certain behavioral pattern to the move up home buyer. There's a certain pattern to somebody who's an investor who has, it's not really an emotional purchase or investment to purchase that property. Now it's all about the dollars. It is more a functional, mechanical use of the property, serving a certain purpose so that it's marketed in a certain way so that it gives them a particular yield on their dollar invested. So you see these patterns. And the same thing when it came to managing the agents, the loan processors, the loan coordinators, the notary doc signers that I had that worked for me, the transaction coordinators, the assistants, and so forth. There's certain patterns that you see of behavior that are consistent. And as you see those things, there are certain behavioral patterns that people are addicted to. Dr. Joe talks about it. It's like, you might need to have maybe an ornery sibling that you're constantly complaining about, and you continuously throw energy in that direction because that feeds your addiction to that energetic play where that's the only thing that you talk to your other relatives about is whatever that sibling issue is that's going on. Because you have a choice to talk about anything else but that, or whatever it is that you're complaining about. Why do you have to complain? There's so many more things that are happening that are good to you than there are bad. It's a matter of where you choose to put your focus and your attention to. So moving on here, most harmful of all, we live in fear that if those problems were taken away, we wouldn't know what to think and how to feel. And we wouldn't get to experience the rush of energy that causes us to remember who we are. For most of us, God forbid, we not be a somebody. How awful would it be to be a nobody, to not have an identity? Question mark. Before moving on, it actually, I must say, the more I have meditated, the longer I go, the more enjoyable it has become to go into that place where you are no one, nobody, no thing, nowhere, no place, in no time. When you go into that place where you're in the void, you have a profound sense of peace, which is a great thing to acquire. And to get to the point where you're able to still the mind and be in that place that where you're in the void, you have you're not attached to your body. You've left the body behind. You don't feel your body. You're gone to some other realm, other dimension. You're someplace else. And that feeling of, I don't know if I would call it exploration, but you are very clearly in a different realm, a different dimension, a different space. And that has a pretty wonderful feeling, because there is a lightness, even though you're in the dark void, there is a lightness, because you don't have your physical body weighing you down. And so, and the other thing is, I mean, for me, it's impossible to have any kind of notion of time, because you don't have, it's such an unusual feeling that you don't have any kind of sensation or notion that's been 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I really have no clue. When I'm meditating, when I do Dr. Joe's guided meditations, of course, I know that some are an hour and 23, an hour and 19, 45 minutes long, 15 minutes long, whichever the meditation is. I'm aware that once once it's done, I know that it happens to be that length of time, because I know what meditation I'm doing. But if I'm doing a meditation that's not a guided meditation by Dr. Joe's, and I just go off and do one of my own meditations, then it can go on for who knows how long. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. It is. Oh my gosh, sorry about that. Somebody put off a firework as they drove in their car. Very odd. Anyhow, so the bottom line is that it is a wonderful, blissful state of being. So you'll find yourself wanting to come back to it. And you can do a 5 or 10 or 15-minute meditation. In fact, there was somebody who was telling me that they had a client that I was treating for. She had some endometriosis. And so I was giving her we did a neuro health reset on her, and then we did several other things with her as well. And one of the things that I told her is that you can take, during different times of the day, you can just, your hand is something that you have with you 24/7. It doesn't matter where you are. So it's convenient wherever you are. If you ever have a pain all of a sudden show up on your body, and maybe you don't remember what the steps are to do a neuro health reset, you can always obviously go to my YouTube channel, because I've got a 3-minute meditation. It's just under 3 minutes there. But let's say it's not convenient to do it out in public or whatnot. You can just take your hand. Make no mistakes. You can just take your hand, and as you now take your focused awareness and you now look at your hand, and as you start to pay attention to your hand, you start to feel the energy in your hand. And then as you're feeling the energy in your hand, you can feel your fingertips, and you start to feel the energy kind of buzzy on your nail beds. And just a few minutes before, you didn't notice any of these sensations. You actually feel the skin on the back side of your hand. You feel the heat now coming from the palm of your hand. And as you do that, you will notice, you can take just 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes to do that. And you'll notice that while you're doing that meditation, that whatever pain you had somewhere else in the body will simply dissolve. So let's go on to the next section here. It's called the selfish self. As you can see, what we identify as our self exists within the context of our collective emotional association with our thoughts and feelings and our problems, and all those elements of the big three. It is any wonder that people find it so hard to go within and leave this self-produced reality behind. So how would we know who we are if we weren't for our environment, our bodies, and time? That's why we are so dependent upon the external world. We limit ourselves to using our senses to define and cultivate our emotions so that we can receive the psychological feedback that reaffirms our own personal addictions. We do all of this just to feel human. So when our survival response is way out of the way and way out of proportion to what is actually happening in our outer world, that excess of stress response hormones causes us to become fixated within the parameters of self. So we become overly selfish. We obsess about our bodies or a particular aspect of our environment, and we live enslaved to time. We're trapped in this particular reality, and we feel powerless to change, to break the habit of being ourselves. These excessive survival emotions tip the scales of a healthy ego, the self we consciously refer to when we say I. When the ego is in check, its natural job is to make sure we are protected and safe in our outer world. As an example, the ego makes sure we stay far away from a bonfire or a few steps away from the cliff's edge. When the ego is balanced, its natural instinct is self-preservation. And there's a healthy balance between its needs and those of others, its attention to itself and to others. So when we're in survival mode in an emergency situation, it makes sense that the self should take priority. But when chronic, long-term stress chemicals push the body and brain out of balance, the ego becomes over-focused on survival and puts the self first to the exclusion of anything else. We're selfish all the time. Thus, we become self-indulgent, self-centered, and self-important, full of self-pity and self-loathing. When the ego is under constant stress, it's got the me first priority. So under those conditions, the ego is primarily concerned with predicting every outcome of every situation because it is overly focused on the outer world and feels completely separated from the 99.99999% of reality. In fact, the more we define reality through our senses, the more this reality becomes law. It becomes our law. And material reality, as law is the very opposite of the quantum law, whatever we place our awareness on is our reality. So consequently, if our attention is focused on the body and our physical realm, and if we become locked into a particular line of linear time, then this becomes our reality. I'm going to read that again because I want you to pay close attention. It says, whatever we place our awareness on is our reality. Consequently, if our attention is focused on the body and our physical realm, and if we become locked into a particular line of linear time, then this becomes our reality. To forget about the people we know, the problems we have, the things we own, and the places we go, to lose track of time, to go beyond the body and its need to feed its habituations, to give up the high from emotionally familiar experiences that reaffirm the identity, to detach from trying to predict a future condition or review a past memory, to lay down the selfish ego that is only concerned with its needs, to think or dream greater than how we feel and crave the unknown. This is the beginning of freedom from our present lives. Friends and gems, isn't that what you want right now during this time? As of this broadcast, we are in the midst of this quarantine where COVID started. We are now the beginning of June. So we've had all the month of March, April, May, and now we're at the beginning of the fourth month of this global pandemic. And all this other stuff is going on, as most of you are aware. And if you watch this video a year or two or three down the line, who knows what other things will be taking place at that time. There's always going to be something, because that is just the nature of living in the 3D world. But the more you are addicted to having to create, to be, really stuck on certainty and to predict a future outcome, and you're in that fight or flight response where you're on guard, alert, and you always have to be preparing for an emergency, and generators. Yes, there's a certain amount of preparation that it's prudent for you to have, insurances, and in the event of calamity or unforeseen circumstances, it's good to be prepared. But to be on constant vigilance, where every day you're manically checking the news just in case, there's going to be some terrible event. Mind you, if you're looking for terrible events on a daily basis, you're going to find them. This is a big world. The planet is, we've got 198 countries and 7 billion people. There is going to, if you look for bad stuff, you're going to find it. Conversely, it's a big world. There's 7 billion people, 198 countries. If you go looking for good stuff, you're going to find it. Whatever it is that you're looking for, you will find. So why focus on the negative stuff? Because that's not going to make you feel any better. It's better to focus on the positive stuff. There's a lot of great things that are going on in the world, as opposed to the negative things. And the recognition of your part in how do you choose to navigate yourself, because you can't navigate anybody else. This is something no one can do for you. Only you can choose to master your own inner dialogue, your own negative thoughts, and your loving self. And you can choose to put the negative at bay and then truly embrace the you who you truly are, and create those unexpected, cool surprises that are going to come into your 3D experience later. At what time, we don't know, but as you keep on doing it, you're going to have a nice little assembly line of all these cool things that are going to manifest into your future, and they're going to be part of your present because you've mindfully, conscientiously put it in queue. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is the beginning of freedom from our present lives. Doesn't that sound delicious? This is the beginning of freedom from our present lives. You no longer have to be enslaved to the thought patterns that have kept you in a place that you don't want to be. You can now choose to have an effect on your future that will have a positive outcome, that will be a desired positive outcome. Isn't that exciting? Okay, if our thoughts can make us sick, can they make us well? So let's go one step further. I explained earlier that we can turn on the stress response by thought alone. I also mentioned the scientific fact that chemicals associated with stress pull the genetic trigger by creating a very harsh environment outside of our cells, and thus creating disease. So by pure reason, our thoughts can actually make us sick. If our thoughts can make us sick, might they also make us well? Let's say that a person had some experiences within a short time frame that caused him to feel resentful. As a result of his unconscious reactions to those occurrences, he held on to his bitterness. Chemicals corresponding to the emotion flooded his cells, and over weeks his emotion turned into a mood, which continued for months and changed into a temperament, which was then sustained for years and formed into a strong personality trait called resentment. In fact, he memorized this emotion so well that the body knew resentment better than the conscious mind, because he remained in a cycle of thinking and feeling and thinking that way for years and years and years. So based on what you learned about emotions as the chemical signature of an experience, wouldn't you agree that as long as this person clings to the resentment, his body will react as though it is still experiencing the long ago events that first caused him to embrace this emotion? So moreover, if the body's reaction to those chemicals of the resentment disrupted the function of certain genes. So moreover, if the body's reaction to those chemicals of resentment disrupted the function of certain genes, and this sustained reaction kept signaling the same genes to respond in the same way, might the body eventually develop a physical condition such as cancer? Yeah, it could. So if so, is it possible that once he unmemorized the emotions of the continuous resentment, by no longer thinking the thoughts that created the feelings of resentment, and vice versa, his body, as the unconscious mind, would be free from the emotional enslavement? In time, would he stop signaling the genes the same way? And finally, let's say he began thinking and feeling in new ways, to such a degree that he invented a new ideal of himself related to a new personality. And as he moved into a new state of being, might he signal his genes in beneficial ways and condition the body into an elevated emotional state ahead of the actual experience of good health? Could he do this to the extent that the body would begin to change by thought alone? What I just described in simple terms happened to a student in one of my seminars who overcame cancer. Bill, 57 years old, was a roofing contractor. A lesion had appeared on his face, and a dermatologist diagnosed the malignant melanoma. Although Bill underwent surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy, the cancer reoccurred in his neck and his side, and finally his calf. And each time he underwent a similar course of treatment. So naturally, Bill experienced, why me? Moments. So naturally, Bill experienced why me moments. He understood that his excessive sun exposure was a risk factor, but he knew others who had been similarly exposed and didn't develop cancer. He fixated on that unfairness. After treatment for the same cancer, on his left flank, Bill pondered whether his own thoughts and emotions and behaviors had contributed to this condition. A moment of self-reflection, he realized that for more than 30 years, he had been stuck in resentment, thinking and feeling that he had always had to give up what he wanted for the sake of others. Oh my gosh, I'm sure that there's a lot of people that feel this way, that they constantly have to give up what it is that they want in order to defer to the sake of others. Doesn't it sound horrible? So for example, he had wanted to become a professional musician after high school, but when an injury left his father unable to work, Bill had to join his family's roofing company, and he habitually re-experienced his feelings upon being told he had to give up his aspirations to the extent that his body still lived in the past. This also set up a pattern of dreams that were deferred. So whenever something didn't go his way, such as the housing market collapsing just after he expanded the business, he always found someone or something to blame. So Bill had so memorized the emotional response pattern of bitterness that it dominated his personality and became an unconscious program. His state of being had signaled the same genes for so long that they had created the disease that now afflicted him. No longer could Bill allow his environment to control him. The people, places, and influences in his life had always dictated how he thought, felt, and behaved. So he set that to break the bonds with his old self and reinvent a new one, he would have to leave his familiar environment. So for 2 weeks in Baja, Mexico, he retreated from his familiar life. First 5 mornings, Bill contemplated how he thought when he felt resentment. He became a quantum observer of his thoughts and his feelings, and he became conscious of his unconscious mind. Next, he paid attention to his previously unconscious behaviors and actions, and he decided to halt any thought or behavior or emotion that was unloving toward himself. That's a biggie. After the first week of this vigilance, Bill felt free because he had liberated the body from its emotional addiction of resentment. And by inhibiting the familiar thoughts and feelings that had driven his behaviors, in a sense, he impeded the signals of the survival emotions from conditioning his body to the same mind. His body then released energy, which was available to use to design a new destiny for himself. So for the next week, Bill became so uplifted that he thought about the new self he was to be and how he would respond to the people, places, and influences that previously controlled him. So for instance, he decided that whenever his wife and his kids expressed a wish or a need, he would respond with kindness and generosity instead of making them feel like a burden. In addition, he focused on how he wanted to think and act and feel when presented with situations that had challenged him in the past. So he was creating a new personality, a new mind, and a new state of being. So Bill began to put into practice what he placed in his mind while sitting on that Baja beach. Shortly after his return, he noticed that the tumor on his calf had fallen off. In a week or so, when he went to his doctor, he was cancer-free. He has remained that way. So by firing his brain in new ways, Bill changed biologically and chemically and from his previous self. So as a result, he signaled new genes in new ways, and those cancer cells couldn't coexist with his new mind, new internal chemistry, and his new self. Once trapped by the emotions of the past, he now lives in a new future. So, next section, creation, living as a nobody. At the end of the previous chapter, I briefly described what it is like to live in a creative mode. Those are the moments of being fully engaged and in flow so that the environment and the body and time are all seen immaterial and don't invade our conscious thoughts. So living in creation is living as nobody. Ever notice that when you're truly in the midst of creating anything, you forget about yourself? You disassociate your known world. You are no longer somebody who associates your identity with certain things or you own, particular people you know, certain tasks you do, and a different place you've lived at specific times. You could say that when you're in a creative state, you forget about the habit of being you. You lay down your selfish ego and become selfless. So you have moved beyond time and space and become pure immaterial awareness. Once you're no longer connected to a body, no longer focused on people, places, or things in the external environment, and beyond linear time, you're entering the door of the quantum field. You cannot enter as a somebody. You must do so as nobody. You have to leave the self-centered ego at the door and enter the realm of consciousness. And as I said in chapter 1, in order to change the body to foster better health, somebody or something in your external circumstances, a new job or relationship perhaps, or your timeline towards a possible future reality, you have to become nobody, no thing, and no time. Thus, there is the grand hint to change any aspect of your life, body, environment, or time. You must transcend it. You must leave behind the big three in order to control the big three. So the frontal lobe, domain of creation and change. When we are in creation, we are activating the brain's creative center. The frontal lobe, part of the forebrain and comprising the prefrontal cortex. This is the newest, most of all, part of our human nervous system and the most adaptable part of the brain. So it tends to be the creative center of who we are and the brain's CEO or decision-making apparatus. The front lobe is the seat of our attention, focus, concentration, awareness, and observation, and consciousness. It is where we speculate on possibilities, demonstrate from intention, make conscious decisions, and control impulsive and emotional behaviors, and learn new things. For the sake of our understanding, though, the frontal lobe performs 3 essential functions, and these will come into play as soon as you learn and practice the how-tos, meditative steps for breaking the habit of being yourself, part 3 in this book. Metacognition. Becoming self-aware to inhibit unwanted states of body and mind. I'll read that again. Becoming self-aware to inhibit unwanted states of mind and body. So if you want to create a new self, you first have to stop being the old self in the process of creation. The first function of the frontal lobe is to become self-aware because we have metacognitive capabilities, the power to observe our own thoughts and self. We can decide how we no longer want to be, to think, act, and feel. This ability to self-reflect us allows us to scrutinize ourselves and then make a plan to modify our behavior so we can produce more enlightened or desirable outcomes. So your attention is where you place your energy. To use your attention to empower your life, you will have to examine what you've already created, and this is where you begin to know thyself. You look at your beliefs about life and yourself and others. You are what you are where you are, and you are who you are because of what you believe about the level of conscious awareness, much like automatic software programs. You'll have to go within the look. Yeah, you'll have to go within and look at these elements you probably haven't even been aware of before. Given that your personality comprises of how you think, act, and feel, you must pay close attention to your unconscious thoughts, reflexive behaviors, and automatic emotional reactions, which put them under observation to determine if they are true and whether you want to continue to endorse them with your energy. To become familiar with your unconscious states of mind and body, take an act of will, intention, and heightened awareness. If you become more aware, you will become more attentive. If you become more attentive, you will become more conscious. And if you grow to be more conscious, you will notice more. If you notice more, you have a greater ability to observe self and others, elements of your reality. Ultimately, the more you observe, the more you awaken from the state of conscious mind into consciousness or conscious awareness. The purpose of becoming self-aware is so that you no longer allow any thought, action, or emotion you don't want to experience to pass your awareness. Thus, in time, your ability to consciously inhibit those states of being will stop, and the same firing and wiring of the old neural networks that are related to the old personality. And as a result of no longer recreating the same mind on a daily basis, you prune away the hardware that is related to the old self. In addition, by interrupting the feelings that were associated with those thoughts, you are no longer signaling genes in the same way. You are stopping the body from reaffirming itself as the same mind. And this process is whereby you quite simply begin to lose your mind. So as you develop the skill of becoming familiar with all aspects of your old self, you will ultimately become more conscious. And your goal here is to unlearn who you used to be so that you can free up your energy to create a new life, a new personality. You can't create a new personal reality as the same personality. You have to become someone else. Metacognition is your first task in moving from your past to create a new future. Number 2, creating a new mind to think about new ways of being. The second function of the front lobe is to create a new mind to break out the neural networks produced by the ways that your brain has been firing for 5 years. By the ways that your brain has been firing for years on end, and influence it to rewire in new ways. When we set aside time and private space to think about a new way of being, that is when the frontal lobe engages in creation. We can imagine fresh possibilities and ask ourselves important questions about what we really want and how and who we want to be and what we want to change about ourselves and our community. Because the frontal lobe has connections to all other parts of the brain, it is able to scan across all the neural circuits to seamlessly piece together stored bits of information in the form of networks of knowledge and experience. So then it picks and chooses among those neural circuits, combining them in a variety of ways to create a new mind. In doing that, it creates a model of internal representation that we see as a picture of our intended result. It makes sense then that the more knowledge we have, the greater the variety of neural networks we've wired, and the more capable we are of dreaming of more complex and detailed models. To initiate the step of creation, it is always good to move into a state of wonder, contemplation, possibility, reflection, or speculation by asking yourself some important questions. Open-ended inquiries are the most provocative approach to producing a fluent stream of consciousness. What would it be like to? What is a better way to be? What if I was this person living in this reality? Who in history do I admire, and what were his or her admirable, who in history do I admire, and what were his or her admirable traits? The answers that come will naturally form a new mind, because as you sincerely respond to them, your brain will begin to work in new ways. By beginning to mentally rehearse new ways of being, you start rewiring yourself neurologically to a new mind, and the more you can remind yourself, the more you will change your brain and your life. So whether you want to be wealthy or a better parent or a great wizard for that matter, it might not be a bad idea to fill your brain with knowledge on your chosen subject, so you have more building blocks to make a new model of reality that you want to embrace. Every time you acquire information, you're adding new synaptic connections that will serve as the raw materials to break the pattern of your brain firing the same way. The more you learn, the more ammo you have to unseat the old personality. Okay, so we're at the top of the hour. We'll continue tomorrow with 5B, Chapter 5. Thank you for tuning in, tapping in, turning on to Love and Money Secrets TV today. I'm your host, Dame Lillian Walker. I hope you've enjoyed the information that we shared with you today. Please do, if you have any questions with regards to meditations, any of the content that we've talked about in this book, or even the book Becoming Supernatural, that was the predecessor to this book, put a comment below. I'll be sure to get back to you. Until then, ciao for now.